Hello, welcome to For the Love of Weather. This is the podcast where we explore the Earth's atmosphere and how we are all connected through the weather and climate. I'm Gemma.
And I'm Aisling. We're both meteorologists and weather presenters, and we just love chatting about the weather. And we hope you enjoy this episode and leave the podcast just loving the weather a little bit more, learning something new, and about how weather and climate can impact our daily lives. We are really pleased today to welcome Laura Young to our podcast, aka Less Waste Laura. Very welcome, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
Laura is an award winning climate activist, environmental scientist, ethical influencer. She was recently named the King's Foundation's 35 under 35 network and was awarded the Scottish Influencer of the Year for 2004-2005 for your work. And you're also just happened to be doing a PhD as well on climate resilience, just because you don't have enough time and that's not hard enough to research over 4 years. But we've so much stuff that we want to talk to you about, but we always just love to find out from everyone, where did your first spark of joy come from, where you thought, I just love the weather, I just love it? Where was that first moment where you thought, no, that's going to be my journey?
I don't know if growing up in Scotland I've ever loved the weather because it's mostly just rain. But I think for me, my spark of joy when it comes to geography, the environment, sustainability was at school. I just absolutely loved learning about it. I absolutely loved being able to put what I'd seen outside into my brain in terms of how are the mountains formed, how do rivers work, what actually happens when a volcano erupts. I just absolutely loved in high school learning about the environment, about sustainability, and I knew from there, like, that's what I wanted to do with my career. I knew I wanted it to be based in and around that subject. But also, when I was at school, I did the Duke of Edinburgh, which is that sort of outdoor pursuits, volunteering, adventure thing that you can do when you're a young person. And that was when I actually got to be outside in nature and actually experience it. And I think that for me was when I realized, yeah, this is definitely what I want to do. I want to somehow have a job that is involved in the environment, but also I want to care for it. I want my job to help try and protect it and promote sustainability because it is just so beautiful and we want to keep it that way. And it sustains all life, like that's where we get our food from. It's where we get the air that we breathe, it's where we get to enjoy time. So I think for me, that was the moment where I thought, I love this weather, even though it rains, and I want to try and protect it.
So the PhD that you're doing, enhancing Scotland's resilience to climate change. So I think it's really interesting where you live somewhere slightly colder. So I'm from Ireland. You probably guessed from my accent. So my memory of summers are just like everyone saying, "Oh, it's a terrible summer," with some expectation that we should be having a different summer to what we're actually having. And I think the idea of climate change is more difficult to see in places like Ireland and like Scotland, unless you're actually really, really paying attention. Because our first awareness of like climate change, all those like what years ago, was the idea of polar bears and ice caps. But it's not just about that. Tell us a little bit about your PhD. I want to know it all. Tell me all. Tell me all.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. This is when you're always challenged to sound really clever and like you totally know everything that you're studying when you absolutely, you're like making it up as you go along. But I think your point's a good one because I would say that climate change, particularly sort of 5+ years ago, you would have envisioned a little skinny polar bear on an iceberg that's kind of slowly melting. And alongside that, you would also picture global warming. And actually, there's a lot of places that you wouldn't be saying that it's been warming, or certainly it doesn't feel that way. You can, of course, dig into the data and see globally we are warming. But, places don't feel like they're getting warmer. They don't feel like they're getting a lot of drought. And we don't seem to see the impacts of it where we are. But we do know that everywhere on the globe has experienced some kind of change because of the climate changing over long periods of time. And in Scotland, we are seeing kind of wetter, wilder winters and hotter, drier summers. Even if it doesn't feel like that, that is definitely what we're seeing. So in Scotland, we're really grappling with issues like flooding. And in the coastal regions, which of course we have thousands of kilometers of coastline, we're seeing changes there to the actual physical structure of the coastline, coastal erosion, through the increased storms that we're seeing because they're increasing in frequency and they're increasing in intensity. So we're getting this kind of wetter, wilder winter, which is pretty grim and not very fun. But we are also seeing our summers getting hotter and drier, and we're having this kind of extended period of dryness. And we're recording this in the summer in Scotland. But when we look back into May, we had this really kind of 3-4 week stretch of really dry weather. And that actually was then impacting the water levels in some of the private water supplies and other water reservoirs, which when you think of Scotland, you don't ever think that we would run out of water, but that is
I
actually
didn't
something that
know
we're seeing.
that. Wow.
Yeah, and we actually had the water utility. So we've just got one water company. It's an arm's length organization of the government. They actually had to do a big public appeal to say, can everyone please stop using so much water? Because actually, this is something that we want to, try and grapple with. So in Scotland, we are seeing the impacts of climate change, even if you wouldn't know it on the face of it or necessarily wake up and feel it. But we are seeing these things. So for me in my PhD, I am funded by something called the Hydronation Programme. That is a Scottish government funded program that is across lots of different elements of the country. But one of the things they do is fund research. And I'm looking at how do we improve climate resilience? How do we build up climate resilience? And how do we do that not just physically by making changes to a place, but also with communities at the heart of it as well? Because nowhere is climate resilient if the people don't understand what's happening. So, my research is this interdisciplinary project where I'm looking at both physically, how can we be making changes to places to be, whether it's flooding or drought or whatever the experience is that they have, even things like the urban heat island effect, where city centres are just too hot because it's a concrete jungle. But also, how can we do that with people? How can we get people involved in co creating the solutions? How can we get people to understand their responsibilities and get people just to understand the risks involved when we have things like flooding? So, my PhD is kind of in this big interdisciplinary space where we're looking at improving the climate resilience of Scotland, of course, but it's relevant beyond that as well to any place really that is kind of facing the same risks that Scotland is.
Have you been like surprised by anything so far? So I know like a PhD is normally, a 4 year journey. You've already been an expert in something to get to that point. So I mean, I sort of saying this in relation to myself as well. I still find myself surprised all the time by weather and climate, even though I live and breathe it and we get to talk to everybody. So has anything really kind of stood out at you so far about, your PhD, and I don't know, just anything surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. I think one of the things, if you look at flooding, because we've already talked there about drought, and I think that is just really surprising that Scotland could ever be at risk of being in drought. But actually, that has been really surprising. But the flip side of that, I think the flooding element is pretty scary as well. So, right now in Scotland, about 1 in 11 homes are at risk of flooding, and 1 in 7 businesses. And that is projected to increase as well as we move into the 2030s, 40s, and 50s. And I think that's pretty scary because I don't think 1 in 10, 1 in 11 people would know that their house is at risk of flooding. And probably one of the other surprising things on top of this is that while I've been doing my research, I've been doing interviews with different people in the community and also speaking to people. There's this one really powerful story of this girl who was actually impacted by flooding during Storm Babette, and her whole house was flooded. And I think sometimes as well, we forget what that means. Your house isn't just filled with water, it's also filled with everything else that comes with a flood. And so your house can be properly wrecked, and all of your stuff, it's filthy, it's damaged, the whole contents of your house is just ruined. And speaking to this girl, she also spoke quite emotionally about the fact that she didn't know that she was at risk of flooding. So she didn't have any preparations. There was nothing that she had done to get ready for Storm Babette. And on top of that, it's the cost of living crisis. People have to make financial decisions in the present moment that makes sense for them. And so one of the other things that she didn't have was any house or contents insurance. So not only do people not know that they are at risk and aren't able to make preparations, they then don't have any resilience themselves for after that. And she said that she literally managed to scoop up her pet and get out the house, and that was it. And so I think that's also the thing that is quite shocking is that when we talk about climate resilience, we're not just talking about, you know, natural flood management or nature-based solutions or forecasting and weather and alerts, we're also talking about people, understanding, are they at risk? And then how do they build up even just their personal resilience? Do they know if the roads get closed, what routes to take? Do they know that there are flood alert systems in Scotland that they can sign up to on a text? And on top of that, do they know how important things like flood and home and contents insurance are? And I think that to me is always quite scary, because we've got the best technology where you can go on to the websites and put in your postcode and work out, what's the frequency of flooding, and work out that risk. But actually, are we then supporting people in that? And that's probably been one of the most shocking things to me. And it certainly made me go away and also think about myself, looking up my own resilience. I've even moved house in my PhD, and that was one of the first things I looked up. And my fiance was like, "Why are we looking up the Scottish Environment Protection Agency website?" I'm like, "Because before we buy this house, we need to know, what we're at risk for." And that was certainly something that shocked me in the process of doing my own research.
I
And
think we do need to make sure people are, as you say, they're equipped, they've got the information that they need to make these decisions. And I joined a call once about flooding, and it was people that had been impacted by flooding. And I was shocked about how they spoke about the aftermath and how long it took them to get their house back together to get again, and like the mental impact it had on them, the fact that they would lived in fear that it would happen constantly over and over again. So I think, yeah, we need to make sure people are equipped and have that information to hand. If it's there, they should know that it's there, and we should make sure that everybody knows that information is there.
I think the sad thing about all of that as well that I hear is once you've been flooded once, the reason I know this is that my parents' house was flooded uh, from frozen water. May I add, from frozen water? But so if you didn't have insurance, then you have to pay for that. But then because it's happened once, the likelihood of you getting insurance again or not having a premium that you can actually afford, it's it was really eye opening. It was really upsetting,
Yeah, and
for
I
them,
think
and
that,
worrying, so worrying.
yeah, the social side of flooding, really any climate
Mm,
impacts, I think is huge. And I've got like a small, I mean, my experience, my personal experience, it probably isn't small, but maybe because of my research and I've met these people who have had much worse experiences, I maybe downplay it. But actually, I think exactly what you were mentioning there, Gemma, about the kind of long term thinking and the preparation. So during Storm Babette, again, it's the same example that many people go back to. But I used to live in a tenement flat in Scotland. So it's these kind of like big flats where there's maybe 9 or 10 properties within one building. They're quite a Scottish style of infrastructure. And many of them are over 100 years old. And I lived in one of these properties. And during Storm Babette, we weren't flooded, but our roof was leaking an incredible amount. So it was this kind of big impact from this storm, and lots of people had the same stories of, tiles being dislodged, or even just the roof itself is just so old. And many of the properties in my flat were having water coming in, but mine had water pouring in from the ceiling. So much so that I actually had to go to Argos in the middle of Storm Babette to buy a paddling pool because I ran out of pots and pans. And I thought, I actually just need a big thing to capture this. But the sad part about that was actually not kind of there and then, because I could kind of deal with it there and then. I was like, we're in the storm, we're in the thick of it. I'm capturing this water. It's fine. I can deal with it. But then afterwards, we had this battle to get our roof fixed, to actually know that the repairs were done. And of course, you're not quite sure if the repairs have been done until the next big storm or rain event. But I remember I had this huge, big ceiling, I guess, that had been kind of ripped apart by Storm Babette, and it took me a good 8 to 10 months to actually just get the courage up to get a painter and decorator in to come and fix it. Because I kept thinking, I don't trust that that roof has been repaired. I don't trust that this is not going to happen again. Um, and I think that is the bit that gets quite worrying. And that's not even then going into the layers of, but there was people in my building who didn't own their property, so they were relying on a landlord to come and fix it. And there was varying degrees of landlords, who were willing to help out and do things. And then you've got damp, and then you've got mold, and it's this kind of layering on. And so I think for me, that's something I've really taken away from this research, that when we talk about climate resilience, we tend to talk about like one-off events. It's like a freak storm. Wow, isn't it amazing? Or not amazing, because that sounds like a positive word, but isn't it interesting and shocking to see, how high did that river get above its normal level, or how many millimeters or centimeters or inches of snow, ice, rain fell. But then we kind of forget after that's over. Once the storm is over, we sort of forget what the impacts are and that long lasting impact to the people that live in those communities. We've kind of forgot about it once the next thing happens, but actually, these communities are dealing with these impacts for months. And that is a huge part of the research that I'm doing.
You touched a bit on nature-based solutions, so I'm fascinated by nature-based solutions. I think they're so interesting, and any opportunity I get, I like look into them. Can you explain what they are and how you're looking at them in your PhD?
Yeah. The easiest way to think about it is think about the past and what we've done. So, traditionally, if we were trying to solve a problem, especially a sort of urban planning problem, coastal erosion or flooding or whatever it might be, we would normally go after a hard engineered solution. So you might think of dredging a river or building a flood defense wall, or even these kind of like gabion baskets along a coastline where you're trying to protect it. So it would be a hard engineered solution, something with concrete, bricks, mortar, steel. We would be physically making a structure to try and solve a problem. But we realized that they aren't always as effective as they've promised to be, but also they don't give any other benefits to the area. So, what we've been trying to do is move away from hard engineering to more nature based solutions. So, actually looking to nature to see, well, how does the natural world normally deal with things like flood or drought, and how can we try and implement that into urban planning? Um, and the kind of classic examples, some of them are international. So, if you are wanting to protect a coastline and protect areas from, big waves, or protect that kind of area, you might think of a mangrove forest. You get lots of those in tropical regions. Or in the UK, you might think of a wetland, a marshland area. If you have an urban area that is way too hot, it's things like urban trees or pocket parks. If you have a new build housing estate that you've obviously taken a field or some sort of forest and you've built on it, we would put in something called a SUD, which is a sustainable urban drainage system. So if you've ever seen a new build estate and then a sort of, sometimes it's fenced off, or a kind of park next to it with big ditches and holes, those are areas that we have deliberately left, not just to bring a bit of recreation and a bit of greenery, but actually because we're wanting to divert water into them. So it's about dealing with issues like flooding, like urban heat, like a lack of biodiversity, but in a way that's mimicking nature or working with nature. But it's also to try and bring those multiple benefits. So if you've got a housing estate that's at risk of surface flooding, yes, you could build more drains, but that potentially is going to overwhelm the sewer system and lead to all sorts of problems, high cost of treating that water, or things like sewage outflows because it's at capacity. But instead, if you were to build a pocket park or a rain garden and actually try and capture some of that water, it doesn't always need to be treated, which is great. It sort of slows the flow of the hydrograph when you think about precipitation hitting the ground and then entering into rivers, streams, and the ocean. And also, it's just nice to look at. Might be a bit of biodiversity as well. So, nature based solutions are trying to solve problems that we see basically through urban planning, but doing it not just with bricks and mortar, but actually trying to utilize nature a little bit. So you might see them popping up in urban areas, and it might be something honestly as small as just like little pockets of wildflowers alongside the road to capture rainwater, to try and clean that water a bit and avoid it all going into the sewers. Or it might be big things like natural flood management, where you're working with an estate or a landowner to really try and do peatland restoration or big marshland, restoration projects. There's all different types of scales that we can be looking at nature-based solutions with. And I will say, I mean, it is quite subjective. Like my fiance will be on a walk and he'll see like a dandelion weed and go, nature-based solution, yeah. And I'm like, well, I mean, depending on who you speak to, pockets of weeds can be nature-based solutions, whether they're intended to or not. So part of it is subjective and part of it is about, interpretation. But that is the kind of overwhelming explanation, the really long way of just explaining what a nature-based solution is.
No, it's a brilliant, absolutely fantastic explanation. I didn't actually know some of that, so yeah, really, really interesting. That there's some those suds. I didn't
Yeah.
realize that's what they were called. There's some around where I live, and I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I did actually see the other day on Instagram some bricks that were growing moss in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
I personally just visually find vertical gardens incredibly inviting. Anything green on the wall, and I'm like, oh, what is, and I go over and look at it, and I've self seen. So maybe there is a future as well where we do have bricks, but
Yeah, and
we've the
I think green walls, living walls are
beautiful.
the kind of perfect example because, there's quite a few in London, there's other cities that have got them. So they look really lovely. So there's an aesthetic value to them. Often they do have some sort of biodiversity, so quite good for pollinators and insects, even birds, nesting birds. They filter the air, they clean the air. It's always good to have that greenery. And quite often they also cool down an area, provide a bit of shade, a bit of shelter. So yes, it's good to and carbon sequestration, all these things. So there's these kind of multiple benefits to green walls, living walls, but no matter what it is. And so that is absolutely, a nature based solution. And we are seeing them pop up in different locations. And I think, a lot of this is also about the social science side of things. And there's a lot of research about the death of the high street in a lot of different places. It's something that is happening quite universally. And although there is lots around shops and online shopping and all that kind of stuff and the change of the use, one of the other reasons people just don't like spending time in city centres and in town centres is because they just don't look very nice. It's these kind of urban areas, not a lot of greenery, not a lot of space to sit down. So also it's just about trying to make spaces more inviting so that people might come and spend time. So there's multiple benefits, even, socio-economic ones to these environmental pieces of infrastructure, which is always great to see.
Now, Laura, we can't have you on the podcast and not
Yeah.
talk to you about the ban on disposable vapes, which is something that you campaigned about massively, and it's now in force. So they are banned in the UK. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how that started? And I mean, I wouldn't even know how to go about doing something like this. Like, how do you even start to change the law like you've done?
Yeah, I mean, it all started by accident, and I'm not really sure I can even tell you how to go about changing the law because there's so many amazing campaigns that have not got anywhere. I don't think there's a framework, a silver bullet way of doing it. But for me, at the end of 2022, I just kept finding disposable vapes as litter. I'm a bit of a litter picker anyway, but that was when I first started to really see the rise in these single use pieces of technology. And one day I'd actually found one and it had been run over by a car and sort of smashed open. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, inside every single one of these, there's a battery, there's electronic components. Like, these are ridiculous. I can't believe we've got these. So I started to look into them. I started to post about it on social media. I started to try and see, was anyone raising awareness for what is the first disposable, mainstream piece of technology. And there wasn't really any research or anyone raising awareness. And so I thought, well, I'll just start speaking about it and see what can happen. And I started to bring together other people that were interested, not just from the environmental side, but the public health side as well. And that kind of all snowballed into a campaign. And if I'm honest, I don't really know how we ended up getting to the full blown stage of the kind of consulting with the government. But really, it just started with trying to raise awareness, talking on social media, and a lot of grassroots stuff as well, bringing organizations together and speaking to people like councillors, local councillors. Obviously, I'm based in Scotland, so members of the Scottish Parliament and obviously members of Westminster Parliament as well, and just trying to raise awareness. And I think really that's where it started. But after consulting with all these different organizations, we realized that there just has to be a ban on these devices. We shouldn't have single use pieces of technology. All technology should be rechargeable, or it should be, plugged into the wall. We can't have single use technology. And I mean, the long story short is it took about 2.5 years from, the first time I started speaking about this on social media to getting the ban implemented in the government. But from 2022 to 2025, we just did a lot of campaigning, did a lot of awareness raising, a lot of consultation with all different levels of government, and were able to get this implemented. So, as of the 1st of June, it is illegal to buy or sell a disposable single use vape. And that is obviously a great step in the right direction to trying to tackle the circular economy and being responsible in terms of waste. Now, has the horrible tobacco and nicotine industry already managed to find loopholes and get around it in a way? Of course they have. That is what they are trying to do. They're trying to sell these products. So we are still tackling a huge amount of waste that is coming from the devices that they've managed to sort of get around some of the legislation. But that is how legislation works. You put out a piece of legislation, you work out, has it been successful? What are some of the loopholes? How can we then build from there? And so we're definitely working in the right direction. But it obviously was fantastic to get that legislative win. And, being from Scotland, it was also great for it to be across the UK, because quite often you get sort of pigeonholed just into one of the nations, and then it isn't as successful as it should be. So it was great to actually have the four nations do this together and come together to go, yeah, we should all have the same piece of policy, the same new law, and then we can build on from there.
It's an astonishing achievement. Uh, so like I work in news, so we see these big things that get through the government, and some of them are really heartbreaking. The fight that they have to get stuff to make it law. Like relatively speaking, 2 years, 2.5 years is you know motorway light speed for what you've done. It's really astonishing what you achieved.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly was. I mean, I think somebody worked out that from the sort of first social media post that I did to the announcement of the ban, it was under 500 days, which is like incredible. Because then you obviously have to build the legislation, and that takes time. We also had an election in between those 2.5 years. So that obviously
I
stalled
forgot
things.
about that.
I
Yeah.
know, and that was it. We were like, oh, we've got a whole new government to have to deal with. But luckily, they were on board with it. I mean, I think partly the success was that it was just such an obvious thing. We shouldn't have technology that is single use and that is throwaway. There's also the huge public health aspect, young people getting their hands on these products. And there's the risk of things like fires with lithium batteries. That was something that we were seeing across the waste industry as these devices were becoming more mainstream. So it was just really obvious. Nobody was in support of single use vapes. The only people in support are the companies that are selling them, and they're the ones, trying to get around it. But actually, I think, it does show that grassroots campaigning can work. But I would say it was a very specific and targeted campaign. If I had come out and said, right, here's my new campaign, I want to ban all technology that is single use, like that might be a bit of a big ask. But what we did is we said, let's start with disposable vapes and build out from there. And actually it was a really specific, targeted, timely campaign as well. These things had kind of just come on the market kind of in COVID time, so we were kind of still a kind of hot off the press in terms of on the back of it. But it has given me a lot of faith in the legislative process, in engaging with your councillors, your MSPs, your MPs. But obviously, we have also seen the industry get around it. And so we also need to see that we have to keep building. It's not like, oh, great, we can wash our hands of that issue. Actually, it's about saying, let's keep on top of it and actually look at the other pieces of fast technology. In the same way that we talk about fast fashion, we can now talk about fast tech, this kind of cheap technology that's coming on the market. And we can try and tackle that as well. So, we're definitely not done, but we can absolutely, stop and celebrate. And I think it's been great. And since the campaign has been ongoing, it's been great to be invited at all levels of government to meet with policymakers, to meet with politicians, to try and talk about all these other issues that we want to try and get change for.
Laura, you're just a force for nature. You really
Yeah,
are. You just like,
totally.
as you were talking, I was just
I
like,
was like,
yes,
I need to
yes,
do something.
yeah. You just, it's just amazing, amazing what you're
Thank you.
doing. It's brilliant. But I suppose aside of that is there's negative stuff that comes from that, especially on social media. How do you deal with that?
I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is like I do think it is really easy to ignore. When I first started kind of using social media as part of my work, I made the conscious decision to make a separate less waste Laura social media presence. So, it's completely separate to my personal life. I've got a separate social media where I can just share, nice photos of friends and family. So partly it's good because I can kind of compartmentalize. I can take myself off it. I don't need to sit and look through any comments. And often it's easy because actually, often people, it's just kind of trolling. You don't really take it too seriously. You learn to just ignore it. And you know that these people would never say half this stuff to your face. But obviously, it does sometimes get hard, especially when comments can be quite personal, or when it's kind of local stuff. If your local paper does a piece about you and you kind of feel like reading through the comments and you think, oh, these are actually people that live in my area, like that's really horrible what they're saying. But to be honest, I find it easy just to ignore. And I think it probably helps having a good support network of friends and family in real life that kind of help you to just ignore it. But it is hard, and it's hard when people are sort of picking you personally apart, whether that's because I'm a bit younger or because they don't think that my academic credibility is there, or because of whatever it might be. It's hard when people are sort of attacking you and your kind of person. And I think as well, you're also putting yourself out there. So there's times that I have been caught red-handed, at McDonald's or something like that. And people are like, I cannot believe that you would ever have to like da 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 da. And you think, oh, I'm not perfect, and you've got those days where you're stuck at a train station and your train's delayed, and guess what? McDonald's is the only thing that's open. I'm really sorry that I went and got, a burger. So I think that is also difficult, is when people kind of hold you up to this standard of like perfection, and you're like, guess what? I'm just like anyone else, and that can be hard. But yeah, I try and ignore it. I've got all the sort of like timers set on my phone so that I only spend a certain amount of time on it. It's all that kind of stuff put into one. But I have always said, if it ever gets too much, you just delete it. Yeah, it'd be a huge loss for me personally. It's also part of my business. Like, it's how I, fund the work that I do, is a lot of it through social media. But at the end of the day, it's not the be all and end all of it. But I can't say there's a perfect way of doing it. And there are some times that it's really got me down, but there's other times that you can just laugh at it. And I would say a lot of me and my friends find a lot of joy in the criticism, and I'm quite often screenshotting some quite good insults I've got and having a laugh about it with friends rather than taking it too seriously, which I know not everyone can, but that's definitely the way that I've been able to deal with it.
We spoke to a climate scientist on the podcast who is brilliant, Ella Gilbert, and she calls out the trolls, and she does YouTube videos where she calls them out
Yeah.
and answers them back and gives them the science, and it's absolutely brilliant.
I'll say, especially, with the vape stuff in particular, I remember back in the beginning when I was talking about vapes, there was a lot of people with a lot of hate, with a lot of insults, like really didn't like what I was doing, wanted me to mind my own business, were kind of saying that I was some draconian, horrible person that was trying to ban everything. But it's also interesting that over the 2.5 years, I would see the same names pop
Yeah.
up and also though become less and less enraged. And I actually had one guy reach out to me and basically apologize, and he was like, I just want to say, like, back in the beginning when you started talking about this, I kind of was quite relentless with sort of bashing you and trolling you. And he was like, and to be honest, and his story was actually quite personal, because he was saying actually he had quit smoking with vaping, and so he was quite like, don't take away this thing that saved my life. And actually over the 2.5 years he suddenly realized, hold on a minute, this industry's not looking out for me. Like, they've just managed to get me addicted to something else. And actually, I'm really sorry. And he said, actually, I completely support what you're doing. So partly, I also know that there are people out there who just either are uneducated, have seen mis or disinformation out there, or just aren't quite ready to accept like what I'm talking about. And often they do come around. Whether or not they then get in touch and tell me about the epiphany of coming back round is up to them. But I do also see that some people disappear, and it's because you probably know that they have been informed, they've actually realized that they've been clued up, or that they've been tricked by, industries that are trying to kind of push out this information. So that's always nice to know that there are people out there who are learning. And I do, sometimes I will also take comments that actually people probably do have genuine questions. It might be phrased in a way that's not very helpful, but actually they do have, questions about stuff. And I think that it is a point to educate. And I think that can be quite good.
I see why you are so powerful at what you do. You speak so well.
Thank you.
So clear. It's so clear to you what you're actually seeing. You're really looking into what people are actually trying to communicate to you. You're picking their communication apart to communicate to them. It's a really lovely thing. Um, we can have you on just without asking you. Can you just give us like a top tip about how to be sustainable? So the biggest question is always, what can I do? And that feeling of like not being powerful enough. And there's loads that we can all do individually, loads that we can all do individually. But we love getting people's takes on just, I don't know, something that you just didn't know about before. What could you do for someone who's like never, looked at this, never thought about doing anything?
Mm.
An easy win.
An easy win. I don't know what I mean, because I think there's so many things. Like there's so many like tips, everyday tips for reducing your waste or reducing your carbon footprint. But I would say, because it's hard, because there's no like one thing, it's like, oh, get a bamboo toothbrush or like remember your reusable water bottle. Like, yeah, all those things are really great. But I would probably say for me, one of the biggest things I've been thinking about is this idea of ownership and how much stuff we have to own. Because I think for me, I have absolutely loved finding out about renting, and that's everything from renting clothing through to renting tools and other garden equipment or things that you need for your house. Because I think we do live in an era of Amazon where literally no matter what you want, you can order it online and you could probably get it the next day or if not in a few days. But we don't always need to own everything, and so I've been looking into stuff like tool libraries or libraries of things. And these are great community initiatives. So when I was a student in Dundee, I moved to Dundee, I got this amazing flat and it was completely empty. And I had to do some like DIY and like put things up on the wall and all that. And I went to B&Q and I went to buy some power tools and I was like, oh my goodness, these are so expensive. I don't have the money for this. That mirror can just sit on the floor until I can afford to go and buy a drill. And when I was talking to a colleague, they were saying, oh, have you ever been to the Dundee Tool Library? You can just go and borrow it. So I, Googled it, found out about this place. And it's an amazing organization where I think at the time it was like £12 a year for membership. And you could just book in and out, like a library book, book in and out everything from a power drill to board games and picnic hampers and marquees, like all this kind of stuff, and you just booked it out for the number of days that you needed. So I went there for £12, got my membership, and booked out, a power drill and all the rest of it, and went home, did my DIY. I also got some advice when I was there, how to not like electrocute myself, and that was very useful. And, went home, did all I needed to do, and then you take it back. And since then, I've just been really enjoying this idea that we don't actually all need to have a shed full of tools and gardening equipment. We don't all need to have like all the kitchen equipment, picnic hampers, marquees, whatever it might be. Like, we don't need to own everything. Actually, as a community, we can share stuff. And I've kind of spread that out into even things like renting fashion. So for the last, well, few years now, if I've got like a special occasion, a wedding, whatever it might be, I am renting stuff. I'm not having to buy it. I'm also renting my own wedding dress and bridesmaids dresses that is happening this year. So I've kind of been enjoying that as a concept. And I think for lots of people, that is something that they could potentially be looking at. Yes, there's lots of plastic free swaps and, you could walk more, cycle more, all that kind of stuff. But actually, this idea of like ownership has been something that I've been really enjoying. So it might be that you have a tool library like near you. It might be that you could start one, or kind of support these different community things. And that's definitely been something that I've very much enjoyed. And yeah, that's probably like a good tip. And for me, that went hand in hand with actually deleting Amazon. So I deleted that a few years ago, and the world doesn't stop turning. You're still able to find things in a different way.
I think, Jamie, you're going to say the same thing I am. Hands down, the best tip that we've heard.
I need to go and find my local
Yeah.
tool library. I mean,
Brilliant.
I
Brilliant.
I stole all my dad's tools to do all the DIY in my house. And anything I need, I just go to people's houses. I'm like, do you have this? Do you have that? Or do you have this bit of clothing? So yeah, but I didn't know there was a tool library. I
Brilliant.
do
I'm
need
going to
some
look one
tools
up.
as well. So I need to go and find my local tool library.
No, it's great. And to be honest, I think we have lost a wee bit of that kind of like community aspect. And and it's hard because sometimes like you know, because I'm also obsessed with this idea of like a village, right? Like I want to be a villager, I want to have a village, and partly though that can feel awkward. And when we first moved into this house, you know, we did need bits and bobs, you know, for the garden and for the rest of it. And I was like, oh, just go ask the neighbor. And my partner was like, I don't want to go and bother the neighbors. I'm like, it's not bothering them. People love to help, but we sometimes feel awkward about asking. But actually, I love, you know, when people are like, oh, can I borrow that thing that you have? I'm like, yes, please. Because otherwise, it is literally just sitting in my cupboard. And the statistic around the power drill is one of the most interesting ones, because a power drill, on average, across its whole lifespan, is only used for 9 minutes. And that is actually true. Because when you think about it, every time you use it, genuinely, you're only using it for 20 seconds. Like that is it. And most people buy them just because they need it for one thing and will only use it actually a handful of times. And so if we can extend the life of our stuff by sharing them, you know, we don't all need to have power drills lying in cupboards that are only used for 9 minutes before they're then thrown away. And so I think part of it is that, you know, I love that. And one of the great things that I do is I'm a volunteer trustee on a board for Circular Community Scotland, which is like a network of these kind of organizations, like tool libraries, bike repair shops, you know, bike hiring shops, you know, clothing things, furniture things. And I just love it. I just love seeing stuff get more use, get more of a life, and also save people money, right? Like I could have gone to B&Q, saved up all my money for months and months and months and bought a £60 power drill, or I could have spent £12 supporting a community interest group, you know, getting the power drill just for how much I need it, and then being able to share that with other people. And, you know, this is about climate resilience as well. After Storm Babette, the tool library also had things like dehumidifiers. And so I was able to book it out for myself in my flat. And then I was able to tell all my neighbors, like, oh, did you know that the tool library, it's actually got dehumidifiers? Like, I've booked it out this week. Once I'm finished with it, I can give it to you. And then if you need it longer, you can book it out. Like, it's about helping people with all sorts of things, and that's what I think is quite powerful about the kind of community element of that.
It is, and how you speak about it is powerful as well.
Well, do you
Absolutely
know, this is one of
brilliant.
my like, since so I've recently moved because I'm getting married and I'm moving to a place called Trin in Ayrshire, and Trin doesn't have a tool library, and this has been on my mind. So this is my like other little idea that I've got that I definitely don't have enough time to do, but I would absolutely love to see one here, especially because Trin, it has like amazing like older residents as well. Like 1 in 3 people are over 65. I love it. It's like I've gone to a retirement village. But people here have like beautiful gardens and like have all these things. And I know that within the community there is enough stuff to like sustain a tool library. And I would love to go around and like get people to donate 1 or 2 things and start a tool library. Because I would absolutely love it. And the mini version of this is that there is along the promenade a beach toy library where you can borrow like sand castles and spades, and it's this little, just like the local litter picking team like built this little like box for it. It is the cutest thing ever, and it is like the perfect example of what we mean, because people come to the beach, they buy a plastic bucket for a couple of pounds and then they just chuck it away or they leave it on the beach, or they can now go to the tool library, take what they need and then return it. And it is like such a cute thing to see the community coming together. So
That is a brilliant idea. I
amazing.
have two little boys and often arrive on the beach, best intentions,
Yeah,
without either a spade or a bucket or something that just
just
got
anything.
like left behind. And actually what you want is to leave it there for the next kid, because if there is other kids there, they're so happy to share their little
Yeah,
shovels and all that sort of stuff. I love that idea.
it's good. And it's funny though, because also, so there's like lots of things in it, like buckets and spades and little like sand stamps and like everything. But people have also left things like tennis rackets and frisbees.
Yeah.
But the problematic thing is that there is also a lot of balls. And so my dog, every time we go to the beach, is like right up. He's like, you didn't bring one, but I know that there's balls in here. Like, pull me out a tennis ball. And so every time now we go to the beach, he'll get a throw around, because even if I don't bring one, there is balls in there that dogs can borrow as well. So it's for everyone, all people, all beach goers, which is fab.
Sounds magic. Laura, we're going to have to move on to the Get to Know Me round. We could literally just talk to you for hours. You've so many amazing ideas. Honestly, I cannot wait to see what's to come for you. It's going to be huge, whatever it is.
I feel I need to get the PhD done. That's what my supervisor used to keep saying as
Yeah.
well. Like once I changed the law in the UK, they were like, "So are you going to get around to finishing the PhD?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, that is next on my." And every time like people are saying, "So what's next?" I can see them looking like, "What is next, Laura? It's the PhD, nothing
Yeah,
else."
yeah,
So I'm like
yeah.
knuckling down, getting my writing on. But yeah, who knows what's next? But lots of options, and loads of people have been in touch as well with like other ideas. So I've got this whole list on my computer of like other things that I would love to get involved in, but there's only one of me, so I have
Oh,
to
well, think of
prioritize.
us. We are very
Yeah,
excited to follow and figure out what it is that you're going to do and help in any way.
thank you.
Okay, so the Get to Know Me round is a mixture of one or two weather related ones, but most of them are just very random. So we always start by asking, what's your favourite season?
Autumn, 100%.
Controversial, Laura.
Not
Only
at
on
all.
this podcast.
Controversial.
Do you know, I feel like not at all because I absolutely love when you can like go for a walk and it's like bright skies, but it's not too hot. You can wear like a light jacket. And I just love the change in seasons. I think when Scotland goes auburn, it's just like beautiful. And also like the summer is done, so all the tourists are away. So you can just enjoy your favorite spots. But yeah, 100% autumn. Have always loved that, definitely.
We have a rivalry on the podcast because Ash likes spring, I like
Okay.
autumn, but I'm slowly swaying towards spring. But then someone will talk about
Ooh.
autumn. I'm like,
I
no,
know, me
it's
too. And I'm
the
like,
season.
oh, maybe, maybe.
Yeah, I also like. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the light days, but there's something exciting when you're like, oh, Christmas is around the corner. Like we're getting to the end of the year, everything's winding down. Feels a lot more relaxing, which is definitely a lovely season.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Just to duplicate myself, so that one of me could just be sitting writing my PhD, and the other one could just like go off and do whatever I wanted. That would be very fun. Yeah, that'd be a good superpower.
That would be a really good superpower. I think a lot of us could do with that
Oh
superpower.
yes, definitely.
If you were a fruit or vegetable, what would you be?
Do you know, I'm going to specifically say a strawberry because I have recently started gardening like properly in this new house, and not a single strawberry I have eaten because the birds keep getting them. So I would like to be a strawberry because I keep feeling like I'm seeing them and then I'm like, oh, that'll be ready tomorrow. And then I come out and a bird will have it. So I'd like to be a strawberry. And we've just had Wimbledon. So maybe I'm like in that sort of strawberry feeling. I'm being influenced.
Strawberries at this time of the year are
Oh,
just
yeah. So
so
good.
good.
Beautiful.
If you could invite one person to dinner, and it could be anybody at all from any historical time frame or even a fictional character, who would it be?
Interesting. I feel loads of people will say David Attenborough, so I'll maybe leave him because I feel like other people might have seen him, but obviously that would be a good choice. But I would maybe say like John Muir. So he was a kind of like Scottish adventurer and he did a lot of stuff for conservation and the countryside. And the John Muir Trust does a lot in terms of like looking after footpaths and things like the footpath of Ben Nevis, for example, is like monitored by the John Muir Trust. So I would like to meet John Muir. So he's obviously no longer with us. He was based in Scotland, but also spent some time in America. And so I would probably love to meet him and just be like, yeah, tell me about what Scotland looked like when you fell in love with the countryside, because it will have changed so much since then.
That would be a great conversation to have. Okay,
Also,
so
I didn't know him. I love when I learn about new people and new things. I'm like, of course somebody has to be in charge of this, but you just don't think about who it
Yeah.
is. That's fascinating.
I remember seeing his name when I drove through Scotland, but I didn't really know much about him. So now I need to go and read more
I know.
about
I was just
him
thinking
now.
that. I'm like, could we have somebody on from the trust to talk about what it's like to look after the
You
bats?
should. And
Yeah.
I'm actually wondering as well. Let me just look him up because I also think he yeah. So, because he's got like a fantastic history. So, I'll just read you word from his Wikipedia so I get it right. But this is fantastic. So, John Muir, also known as John of the Mountains and Father of the National Parks, was a Scottish born American. He was a naturalist, author, philosopher, botanist, zoologist, glaciologist, and he helped actually start the preservation of the wilderness in the United States. And I am pretty sure that um he went on a week-long visit to Yosemite, which is somewhere that he'd read about, and that was really what started the movement to actually get national parks in America. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt went with him on a visit to Yosemite. And basically, that was what helped nudge the US start national parks. And that all started because of his absolute love of the outdoors as a child in Scotland, because he obviously emigrated not long after that. And I think, yeah, his whole life is like absolutely phenomenal. And I'm also sure he was blind. So like he lost his eyesight when he was young as a child. There's a whole amazing story about him. So he would definitely be someone that I would love to get to know a bit more.
The final question we like to ask everyone on the podcast is, what's one thing that you wish everybody knew about climate resilience?
Great question. I think, I mean, it's huge. I think probably I would just want people to understand that the scientists can only get us so far when it comes to climate resilience. But after that, it's about people and it's about communities. And I would really want people to take some time to understand what their role in that is. And some of that, yeah, it's individual. It's like circling back to what we spoke about at the beginning. It's, do you need to make changes to your house? Do you have insurance? That kind of thing. But also realize that as a community, it's your job to look out for your neighbors, to look out for, the older folk that live on your street or the young family that live on your street, to understand that as a community, we've actually got a role to play in helping build that climate resilience together. So just for people to be aware, to try and figure out a bit about their local area and see what their role is. Because yeah, we've got great scientists and weather forecasters and people who can tell us, we can drop a pin on a map and talk about the climate resilience in terms of the science, but ultimately it's about people. And I think that's what I would really want people to take away about climate resilience.
That's probably actually what I've taken away from this whole podcast. You just speak so beautifully, so incredibly well. It's been a real eye opener, and I love that about this podcast. No matter what I think I know, we just always learn so much more. So thank you so much for your time today. We really, really appreciate it. And if you have been listening and you've enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Share the podcast with a friend. Laura, where can we find you?
I am on all social media and you can find me at Less Waste Laura.
And you can find all of us, you can find us on all socials for the love of weather. We're now on YouTube as well, which is a very exciting thing and complicated thing to do. I've been
We're
trying to
learning as
meander
we
my
go. We're learning as we go.
meandering my way through that. But honestly, Laura, it's just been inspirational to talk to you. It's incredible. We value your time so much. I've no doubt in the future you won't be able to spare us an hour with all of the amazing things that you're going to do. So thank you for being our guest today.
No, thank you for having me.
And we just hope that you leave this episode loving the weather just that little bit more.
Thanks for listening. Bye bye, everyone.